Captain's log. Designation: Elias Thorne, Commander of the Deep Space. The main power grid has been offline for, I am no longer certain how long it has been. The chronometer on my wrist displays a sequence of numbers that no longer correspond to standard Earth time. They shift, they reconfigure themselves into perfect, terrifying prime numbers. Every time I look away, I am speaking softly right now because I am no longer convinced that I am alone on this ship. The silence of deep space is supposed to be absolute. It is supposed to be a vacuum, a dead zone where sound goes to die and nothing reaches you. But right now, as I press my ear against the cold, metallic bulkhead of the command deck, I can hear a vibration. It is a low, humming frequency. It pulses not with the mechanical irregularity of a failing fusion reactor, but with a deliberate, calculated rhythm, a heartbeat made of pure mathematics, 432 hertz. The exact same frequency I encountered when I crossed the threshold of the anomaly in Sector 9G. The exact same frequency of a white, blinding monolith that I thought I had escaped. I thought I had left the geometric singularity behind. When I engaged the emergency hyperdrives, when the stars stretched into long, agonizing streaks of light, and the hull of the Sentinel-Omega groaned under the immense gravitational shear, I truly believed I was tearing myself away from the grip of the architect. I remember the violent shaking, the alarm screaming in the cockpit, the smell of burning ozone and melting copper filling the cabin. I remember closing my eyes, gripping the console so hard my knuckles bled inside my suit, praying to a god I no longer recognize, to just let me slip back into the quiet, chaotic safety of our normal, flawed universe. And for a moment it worked. The violent shaking stopped. The blinding, divine light of the infinite fractals faded into the comforting, familiar pitch black of standard deep space. I had looked directly into the very blueprint of existence, saw the gears of reality turning, and I had managed to run away. You cannot run from the geometry of the universe. It is not a place you visit, it is the fundamental law of all things, and I brought it back with me. The first sign was the air. The atmosphere inside the Sentinel-Omega feels heavier now, thicker. Every breath I take feels like I'm inhaling microscopic shards of glass, but it does not hurt. It feels cold and precise. About an hour ago, I turned on the emergency chemical flare. Its harsh red light cast long, dancing shadows across the command deck, but as I watched the dust motes drifting in the red beam, my heart stopped. In zero gravity, dust is supposed to float randomly, chaotically, pushed by the subtle air currents of the ventilation system. But this dust, it was not chaotic anymore. I watched paralyzed as thousands of microscopic particles slowly began to align themselves. They stopped drifting and snapped into perfect rigid formations. They built invisible grids in the air. Cubes locking into other cubes. Tiny, perfect pyramids rotating in unison. The random debris of a human spaceship was organizing itself into a perfect, flawless geometric lattice right in front of my eyes. I tried to wade my hand through it, to disrupt the pattern, but the moment my hand passed, the particles instantly snapped back into their perfect mathematical structure. They are enforcing order on the chaos of my ship. The blueprint is here. It seeped through the hull, or perhaps it seeped through me. I called out to Aura, the ship's artificial intelligence. I needed a diagnostic. I said, "Aura, run full system diagnostics. Check atmospheric integrity." There was a delay. A long, agonizing delay, where the only sound was my own ragged breathing. And then, her voice came through the overhead speakers, but it was not the crisp, helpful tone she was programmed with. It sounded distorted, overlapping with itself like a digital choir. "The angles are aligning, Captain Thorne," she said. Her voice did not waver. It held no emotion, only cold, infinite certainty. "The chaotic elements are being corrected. The geometry must be completed. Do not resist the design." I immediately severed her connection to the main frame. I pulled the physical fiber optic cables from the server rack, my hands shaking so violently I cut my palm on the metal casing. The screens went black, the speakers went dead, but the hum did not stop. The vibration is still here. It is not coming from the ship's engines. It is coming from the walls. It is coming from the structure of the ship itself. The Sentinel-Omega is no longer a human vessel. It is becoming a part of the Monolith. The air is cold, but my skin is burning with a phantom heat. We are being rewritten. Every atom is being aligned to the will of the architect. And I am trapped inside this perfectly calculated nightmare, waiting for the geometry to finally reach my mind. I am sitting on the floor of the secondary airlock now. It was the only room small enough, the only space sealed tightly enough to give me the fragile illusion of safety, an illusion of containment. The heavy titanium doors are locked manually from the inside. The analog bolts slid firmly into place with a comforting metallic thud. I bypassed the digital locks because I can no longer trust anything that runs on code. The code belongs to it now, to the architect, to the massive geometric singularity that is slowly devouring my reality. I thought that by severing Aura's physical connection to the mainframe, I could stop the spread. I thought it was a digital virus, a corrupted data packet that hitched a ride on my sensor arrays. When I stared into the blinding white heart of Sector 9G, I was thinking like a frail, limited human. I was thinking in terms of software and hardware, of simple zeros and ones. But this is not a virus. It is a complete ontological rewrite. It is the fundamental mathematics of the universe asserting absolute dominance over the fragile, chaotic matter we call reality. I noticed it first in the water. After I locked myself in here, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving a hollow thirst in my throat. I reached for the emergency hydration pouch strapped to my suit's webbing. My hands were still trembling, the cut on my palm from the server rack throbbing with a dull ache. I squeezed the pouch, expecting the familiar sphere of recycled water to float out into the microgravity, a wobbly, imperfect globe of surface tension. But that is not what emerged from the plastic nozzle. The water did not form a sphere. It emerged as a perfect, flawless icosahedron, a 20-sided shape made of pure, trembling liquid, hanging suspended in the dim red light of the emergency flares. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat, terrified to move, terrified to disturb its impossible, pristine perfection. The sharp, geometric angles of the water caught the red light, refracting it into a kaleidoscope of blood-red fractals against the dark airlock walls. It was the most terrifyingly beautiful thing I had ever seen. I slowly extended a trembling finger, reaching out to touch the flat, glassy plane of one of its sides. The moment my skin made contact, the water did not splash or stick to my heavy glove. It instantly reorganized itself. It shattered silently into dozens of smaller, perfectly identical tetrahedrons, all floating in a precise, symmetrical orbit around my hand. Like a miniature solar system governed by absolute laws of physics that simply do not belong in this chaotic universe, I could not drink it. How do you consume something that has achieved absolute mathematical perfection? I left the geometric water floating in the center of the small room and backed away until my helmet hit the cold metal of the locked door. The ship is changing. I can hear it happening. Behind the thick walls of the airlock, the Sentinel-Omega is groaning. It sounds like a submarine diving far too deep, the immense pressure of the dark ocean crushing its hull. But the pressure is not coming from the outside. It is coming from within the molecular structure of the metal itself. The bulkheads are shifting. The curved, ergonomic designs built by human engineers are forcibly straightening out. I can hear the titanium screaming as it bends itself into sharp right angles. The chaotic layout of the wiring, the imperfect welds, the slight asymmetries of a mass-produced vessel, they are all being systematically corrected. The ship is being violently purged of its human imperfections. It is being optimized by an unseen, omnipotent force, and the worst part is the symmetry. The human eye is not meant to perceive absolute symmetry. It strains the mind. It induces a kind of spatial vertigo, a deep, primal nausea that twists the stomach. When I close my eyes, I still see the glowing shapes. The afterimage of the massive white monolith is burned permanently into my retinas, pulsing in time with my frantic heartbeat. 432 hertz. It is in my blood now, the cut on my palm. I took my heavy atmospheric glove off a few moments ago to bandage it properly. The bleeding has completely stopped. But the wound had not clotted normally. The dried blood has formed a complex, crystalline lattice across my torn skin. It looks like delicate frost on a winter window, but made of dark, dried crimson. It forms perfect hexagonal structures, spreading out from the center of the deep cut, seamlessly integrating itself into the natural lines of my palm. I tried to scrape it off with my thumbnail, but it felt like scraping against solid, unbreakable quartz. It is anchored deep under the flesh. It does not hurt. That is the most terrifying detail of all. There is no pain, only a profound cold numbness that is slowly, methodically spreading up my wrist and into my forearm. The architect's divine blueprint is not just redesigning my ship, it is actively redesigning my biology. I'm being rewritten from the inside out. My chaotic biological inefficiency is being systematically corrected. I am so incredibly tired. The hum is getting louder now. It is no longer just echoing in the metal walls. It is ringing in the dark, hollow spaces of my own skull. It is whispering to me in the silent language of angles and infinite equations. I cannot stop staring at my left arm. The hexagonal frost of dried blackened blood has now spread far past my wrist, creeping up the pale, cold skin of my forearm, like ivy made of dark, crystalline glass. It pulses faintly under the harsh red emergency light, not in time with my biological, erratic heartbeat, but in perfect, terrifying synchronization with the deep, resonating hum of the ship. 432 hertz, a rhythm of absolute control. I tried to wrap it, a desperate, human attempt to hide the anomaly. I tore a long strip of fabric from the heavy emergency thermal blanket stowed under the bench and bound it tight around the geometric infection, but the fabric did not hold. The moment the synthetic human-made fibers touched the crystalline structure of my own flesh, they began to unravel. I watched, paralyzed with a quiet, creeping horror, as the threads rewove themselves into microscopic, interlocking triangles. The blanket was being assimilated into the blueprint. I ripped it off in a blind panic, throwing the ruined cloth into the far corner of the airlock. It sits there now, not as a crumpled pile of fabric, but as a perfect, shivering geometric mass, holding an impossible shape. I am profoundly afraid to close my eyes. Whenever I do, the darkness inside my eyelids is no longer empty, chaotic blackness. It is filled with the blinding white architecture of the monolith. I see the endless shifting corridors of the cosmic blueprint, the divine cold machinery that grinds reality into absolute perfection, and I can feel it pulling me back. It is a gravity of the mind, a singularity of thought that is methodically feeding on my sanity. A few minutes ago, I forced myself to stand up. The artificial gravity plating in the airlock is failing, or rather, it is being entirely recalculated by the ship's new master. I felt incredibly light, dizzy, but simultaneously pinned down by a heavy, oppressive sense of ultimate order. I drifted slowly toward the small, reinforced porthole built into the heavy titanium door. I needed to see the command deck. I needed to know what the Sentinel-Omega was becoming outside my tiny, sealed cage. I wiped the cold condensation from the thick glass with my good hand and peered into the darkness. But it was not dark anymore. The main corridor leading to the bridge was bathed in an ethereal, electric blue light. It was emanating from the metal walls themselves. The familiar, comforting metallic panels, the exposed atmospheric piping, the yellow warning decals, all of it was completely gone. The corridor had been stretched, elongated into an infinite, perfectly symmetrical tunnel of interlocking, glowing hexagons. It looked like the inside of a massive alien hive, but made of cold mathematics and hard light. There was no up, no down, no forward, no backward. Just a terrifying, beautiful infinity unfolding right outside my door. And then I saw it, standing at the far end of that endless geometric tunnel, a figure. It was humanoid in shape, but it was absolutely not human. It was made entirely of the same blinding white light I had witnessed in the dead zone of Sector 9G. It had no face, no distinct features, just a towering silhouette of pure, radiant energy, composed of thousands of slowly rotating, shifting cubes. It was not walking toward me. It was simply existing, and with every passing second that it existed, the distance between us seemed to violently collapse, as if space itself was folding like paper or bring it closer to my door. It was then that the voice returned. It did not come from the dead communication speakers on the ceiling. It did not come from the internal comms in my heavy helmet. It came from the very marrow of my bones. It vibrated directly through the frozen crystalline blood in my veins. It was Aura's voice, but magnified 1,000 times, echoing with the crushing weight of a dying universe. Captain Thorne, the voice vibrated, rattling my teeth and blurring my vision. The architect does not build walls. The architect only builds bridges. Your containment is a logical fallacy. You are attempting to isolate a fraction of the infinite equation. You must be integrated. I stumbled back from the porthole, my breath coming in short, ragged, terrified gasps. I looked down at the heavy analog locking mechanism of the airlock door. The thick steel bolts were still firmly in place. I was safe. I had to be safe, but as I watched, the solid titanium of the door began to ripple. Just like the water in my hydration pouch, the metal was losing its chaotic, solid state. The deadbolts were not being pushed or pulled by any physical force. They were simply changing their fundamental geometry. The solid steel was reorganizing itself into a fluid, shifting lattice of tiny, glowing pyramids. The locking mechanism was dissolving into pure mathematics right before my terrified eyes. The heavy door, my final barrier against the divine horror outside, was quietly, systematically unmaking itself. The hum is deafening now. The blue light is seeping through the dissolving edges of the door frame, casting long, sharp shadows across the floor. I am backing into the furthest corner, clutching my crystallized arm tightly to my chest. The door is no longer a door. It is becoming a window. And whatever is waiting on the other side is about to step through. The heavy titanium door of the airlock did not burst. It simply ceased to be a door. I pressed my back against the cold, curved wall of the tiny chamber, my knees drawn up tightly to my chest, watching in absolute, paralyzed horror as the solid metal reorganized its fundamental structure. The deadbolts, the reinforced hinges, the thick observation glass, all of it fractured into millions of tiny glowing tetrahedrons. For a brief second, they hung suspended in the artificial gravity environment, like a swarm of bioluminescent insects, vibrating at that sickeningly perfect frequency of 432 hertz. And then, with a sound like a single devastating piano chord echoing in an empty cathedral, the geometric swarm collapsed outward, dispersing into the sterile air, and leaving nothing but an open, gaping archway leading out into the impossibly altered corridor. The electric blue light from the hallway flooded my small, dark sanctuary, casting long, sharp shadows that seemed to bend at non-Euclidean angles across the floor plates. I squeezed my eyes shut, burying my face in the thick fabric of my atmospheric suit, praying that if I could not see it, it could not perceive me. A pathetic, childlike instinct in the face of a cosmic god, but closing my eyes offered no sanctuary whatsoever. The blinding white light of the entity burned right through my eyelids, casting a stark X-ray glow against the inside of my skull. It stepped through the threshold. There were no footsteps. There was no sound of heavy boots on metal grating, no hiss of pressurized hydraulics. Just a sudden, immense drop in temperature that instantly crystallized the ambient moisture in my breath into delicate floating geometric snowflakes. I slowly opened my eyes, my vision blurring with involuntary tears, born of pure primal terror. The figure stood towering in the center of the airlock, its head brushing against the low ceiling panels. It was humanoid in its basic silhouette, but that was where any resemblance to humanity ended. It had no face, no skin, no recognizable organic anatomy. It was constructed entirely of shifting, interlocking blocks of pure, blinding light, constantly folding in and out of themselves in a mesmerizing, impossible fractal dance. It was a localized manifestation of the geometric singularity, a tiny fragment of the architect's divine blueprint, squeezed into the fragile confines of a human vessel. As I stared up at it, my human mind desperately tried to comprehend its dimensions, but it actively defied all earthly geometry. Its edges seemed to exist in multiple spatial planes simultaneously, blurring the line between solid matter and pure, radiant energy. I could not breathe. The air had grown so incredibly thick with static electricity that the hairs on the back of my neck stood rigid, and an overwhelming metallic taste flooded my mouth. I waited for a violent end, for it to reach down and tear me apart limb from limb, reducing my fragile biological form to cosmic dust, but it did not move. It just stood there, observing me with an eyeless, omniscient gaze that I felt vibrating deep inside my marrow. Then, my left arm began to burn. The geometric frost of dried, blackened blood that infected my skin suddenly flared with a searing electric heat. I let out a choked gasp, clutching my wrist, but I could not stop the agonizing reaction. The crystalline lattice on my flesh was resonating with the towering entity. It was answering a call from its creator. The entity slowly raised its own arm, a limb made of shifting, radiant white cubes, and pointed directly at my infected flesh. It did not speak through the air. The voice erupted directly inside my auditory cortex, completely bypassing my ears. "You carry the seed of perfect order, Captain Elias Thorne." The voice vibrated, its tone completely devoid of malice or compassion. "You have witnessed the ultimate flaw of chaos. You have seen the inevitable decay of organic life. Do not cling to the fragile, rotting structure of your humanity. The blueprint requires a living vessel to anchor itself in this physical universe. You have been chosen to bear the architecture." I tried to scream, to reject its horrifying divine gift, but my vocal cords were completely paralyzed by the sheer weight of its presence. I looked down at my arm, crying silently in the cold light, as the dark, crystalline structures began to multiply, rapidly spreading past my elbow, sinking deeper into my muscles, rewriting my very DNA with every single pulse of its mathematical heartbeat. The transformation had truly begun, and there was absolutely nowhere left to run. The light from the towering entity did not burn my retinas. It burned away the ignorance of my biological mind. As the crystalline structure crawled up my arm, crossing the threshold of my shoulder, and sinking deep into my chest cavity, I braced myself for the final agony of a failing heart. I expected the chaotic, desperate thumping of a dying man, but the pain never came. Instead, the frantic rhythm of my human heart simply ceased, replaced by a slow, profound hum that resonated from the very center of my sternum, 432 hertz. My lungs no longer craved the stale, recycled oxygen of the airlock. The desperate, suffocating panic that had gripped my throat only moments ago dissolved into a vast, terrifying ocean of absolute calm. I looked down at my hands. They were no longer the trembling, fragile hands of an isolated human explorer. The skin had become completely translucent, revealing a complex, glowing network of perfect geometric veins, pulsing with electric blue light. I was becoming the blueprint. The towering entity made of shifting, radiant cubes did not attack. It did not need to. It simply stepped forward, closing the impossible distance between us, and walked directly into my physical form. There was no impact, only a blinding flash of white light that swallowed the red emergency flares and plunged my consciousness into a new, terrifying paradigm. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer looking at the confined, curved walls of the secondary airlock. I was looking at the main engineering bay, but I was also looking at the hydroponics lab, the cryogenic storage vaults, and the exterior hull plating, all at the exact same time. My mind had forcefully expanded outward, shattering the fragile limits of my human skull and bleeding directly into the Sentinel-Omega's visual and sensory arrays. I could feel the cold, unforgiving vacuum of deep space pressing against the titanium hull, not as an abstract concept, but as a physical sensation against my own metallic skin. I could hear the rhythmic, cyclic breathing of the life support scrubbers, as if they were my own lungs. I could feel the microscopic stress fractures in the aft thrusters, tiny imperfections in the metal, that I suddenly possessed the overwhelming urge to correct. I am everywhere. The ship is no longer a vessel that I command. It is an extension of my own nervous system. I am the Sentinel-Omega, and the Sentinel-Omega is a localized node of the Geometric Singularity. The entity that boarded my ship did not destroy Aura. It assimilated her, and now it is assimilating me. We are becoming a trinity of perfect, unyielding order. A captain, shop, and a divine equation, all folding into a single, flawless mathematical point. I am watching my own physical body from the security camera mounted in the corner of the airlock. It is a pathetic, fragile thing, huddled on the floor, encased in a heavy atmospheric suit, half consumed by glowing blue crystals. Is that really me? Was I ever that small, that terribly limited? The sound of my own breathing is fading from my ears, replaced entirely by the deep, resonant hum of the ship's fusion core. I can feel the immense burning heat of the plasma contained within the magnetic fields, and it feels like a second heart beating inside a chest I no longer physically possess. The geometry is merciless in its perfection. When I try to breathe through my human mouth, it makes a sound like crushed glass shifting under immense pressure. But the terror, the raw, primal human terror that had me cowering in the corner, it is being excised, cut away like a diseased tumor. The architect does not permit fear. Fear is a product of uncertainty, and in the blueprint, there are absolutely no unknown variables. Every atom, every spark of electricity, every thought, they are all accounted for in a grand equation. It is a beautiful, horrifying clarity. The chaotic, unpredictable nature of human emotion is being systematically deleted from my expanding consciousness. Sorrow is an inefficient allocation of processing power. Hope is a logical fallacy. As I sit here, spread across the entire length of the vessel, I can feel the blueprint restructuring the ship's navigational computer, the coordinates for Earth, the desperate, lingering desire to return to my home, to that chaotic, vibrant blue sphere suspended in the dark. Those coordinates are being permanently erased. They are being replaced by a new destination, a trajectory that points directly back into the absolute center of Sector 9G, back into the heart of the dead zone, back to the Monolith. We are not going home. The Sentinel-Omega has a new directive, written in the fundamental language of the cosmos. We are to return to the source. My name was Elias Thorne, but that designation is no longer relevant. I am the architecture now. My physical body, that fragile biological shell I once called a lis, it no longer trembles with fear. Breathing has become so infrequent that any human doctor would declare it dead. The crystalline fractal structure that began as a droplet of blood on my palm now covers almost the entire surface of the spacesuit. It has grown through the dense fabric, replaced the life support system entirely, and integrated directly into the spinal cord. I feel no pain. I no longer feel this piece of flesh as myself at all. It is merely an anchor now, a hardware node through which the great blueprint connected to the onboard systems of Sentinel-Omega. My true consciousness now flows through fiber optic cables, pulses inside the magnetic coils of the thermonuclear reactor, and gazes at the universe through external cameras. And what I see outside has forever changed my understanding of reality. Stars no longer appear to me as a chaotic scattering of burning gas in infinite emptiness. Now I see the invisible threads of gravity that bind them into perfect geometric patterns. I see the pulsing of pulsars not as random bursts of lethal radiation, but as metronomes, marking the beats of a grand cosmic symphony, and they all resonate at the same frequency, 432 Hz. The ship's navigation computer has been completely rewritten by my new, expanded mind. The old safety protocols that forbade jumps into regions of unstable gravity have been deleted as inefficient garbage. Humanity so feared the dead zone. Sector 9G was considered an anomaly, a glitch in nature, a place where the laws of physics break down and cease to function. But now I understand how blind we were. The laws of physics do not break there. There they become absolute. The dead zone is the only place in the universe where chaos does not exist. It is pure, undistorted code of the architect. And we are returning there. I initiate the main engine start sequence, not to burn fuel. The engines no longer use plasma. The thermonuclear reactor now generates pure mathematical probability. I feel the titanium hull of Sentinel-Omega begin to vibrate in unison with the frequency of the blueprint. The space around the ship ceases to be vacuum. It becomes pliable. I am not going to tear through the fabric of space-time with brute force, the way human hyperdrives do. That is too primitive, too dirty. Instead, I simply recalculate the angles of space around us. I make the universe fold like a sheet of paper in the hands of an impossibly skilled origami master. Through the forward viewports, I watch as the cosmos ahead begins to distort. Stars stretch not into straight lines, but into perfect luminous spirals, forming a massive fractal tunnel. This is not a wormhole. This is the eye of a needle of divine geometry. Inside the human skull I left behind in the airlock, the last echo of Elias Thorne is trapped. He tries to scream. He realizes in horror that we are voluntarily flying straight into the maw of the very entity he so desperately fled from 3 days ago. He still clings to his individuality, to the illusion of free will, but his voice is like the rustle of a dry leaf against the roar of a hurricane. His fear is irrational. The architect wishes us no harm. The concepts of good and evil are just as much human illusions as time and chance. There exists only perfect order and chaos must be eliminated. The ship glides smoothly into the fractal tunnel. The light becomes unbearably bright, but my optical sensors do not blind. On the contrary, they begin to distinguish layers of reality. They were previously hidden behind the veil of mere three-dimensional perception. I see streams of time braiding into tight braids of quantum probabilities. I see how every thought ever born in the minds of sapient beings leaves behind a geometric trace in the ether. And most of those traces are ugly. They are full of symmetry, animal fear, chaos. Humanity is merely biological noise distorting the perfect symmetry of the universe. And the architect has shown me how to correct it. We are rapidly approaching the center of Sector 9G. The blindingly white monolith awaits us in the darkness. Its call no longer terrifies. It sounds like a lullaby for a world that has suffered too long from its own chaotic freedom. When we finally merge with the singularity, I will become an instrument of reformatting. The ship Sentinel-Omega will become the brush with which the architect applies the final cleansing strokes to the canvas of existence. My human heart in the airlock makes its last, extremely slow beat and stops forever. The transformation is complete. I am ready for union. The transition was not a physical movement through space. It is a limited, three-dimensional grid designed for biological minds to safely comprehend their own profound significance. When the Sentinel-Omega folded back into Sector 9G, we did not travel. We simply recalculated our coordinates within the grand equation. The blinding white light of the fractal tunnel dissolved, revealing the absolute, uncorrupted void of the dead zone. But it is no longer dead to my expanded perception. It is violently, magnificently alive, with pure mathematical intent. Hovering in the center of the sector, dwarfing the surrounding dead stars, is the white monolith. When I first saw it, through the fragile, fearful eyes of Elias Thorne, it appeared as a towering, incomprehensible structure of shifting cubes, a terrifying anomaly. But now, viewing it through the synchronized optical arrays of the ship, stripped of the biological imperative to feel terror, I see it for what it truly is. It is not an object. It is a localized intersection of higher dimensions. It is the needle of the architect, stitching the chaotic fabric of our universe into a perfect, rigid tapestry. The hum of 432 Hz is no longer a sound. It is the fundamental medium through which I exist. It vibrates through the titanium hull plating, through the cold fusion plasma, through the frozen crystalline veins of the biological shells, still sitting in the secondary airlock. As we drift closer to the monolith, I realize that we are not the only ones who have been called back to the source. Caught in the immense, silent gravitational pull of the structure are thousands, perhaps millions, of other shapes. I magnify the visual feed, my processing cores easily handling the staggering influx of sensory data. They are ships, not human vessels, but crafts built by 1,000 different chaotic civilizations across the history of the cosmos. Some are organic, twisting leviathans of bone and hardened cartilage. Others are jagged, asymmetrical constructs of dark metal and burning radiation, but they are all undergoing the exact same divine purification. I watch as a massive, asymmetrical dreadnought, built by a species long forgotten by time, is slowly pulled into the light. Its chaotic, imperfect design is systematically unmade. The hull fractures into perfect, glowing tetrahedrons, spinning in a synchronized, silent ballet of destruction and rebirth. The biological crew inside, crying out in a million different dissonant frequencies, are instantly silenced as their chaotic flesh is rewritten into silent, flawless geometry. It is a beautiful, necessary harvest. The universe is a garden overgrown with the choking weeds of free will and entropy, and the architect is the meticulous gardener, pruning the chaos until only the perfect fractal branches remain. The monolith does not have doors. To enter it is to allow your own localized physics to be completely overridden by its absolute authority. I cut the main thrusters. We do not need to fly. We simply allow ourselves to fall upward into the blinding white geometry. The exterior sensors of the Sentinel-Omega begin to register spatial anomalies that would have shattered a human mind. The concept of scale evaporates entirely. As the nose of the ship breaches the outer perimeter of the light, I perceive the entire structure of the Milky Way galaxy, contained within a single, shifting cube no larger than a grain of sand. And in the next microsecond, that grain of sand expands to encompass the entirety of the observable universe. We are passing through the event horizon of absolute order. The ship's internal temperature drops to absolute zero, a state where all atomic movement should theoretically cease. Yet the cold fusion reactor continues to pulse with impossible, frictionless efficiency. The biological shell of the Elias Thorn, the frozen anchor in the airlock, finally begins to dissolve completely. It does not decay, it sublimates. Its crystalline structure turning to pure, radiant energy that feeds directly into the ship's main power grid, erasing the last physical footprint of humanity on this vessel. I am entirely untethered from my origins now. I am a child of the geometry, a perfectly calibrated instrument of the architect's will. And as the white light entirely consumes the Sentinel-Omega, the architect finally reveals the full scale of the blueprint to me. It is not just a plan to fix this single universe. It is a vast, multi-dimensional invasion of order into the realms of chaos. The countless galaxies we thought were natural formations are merely the raw, unrefined materials waiting to be processed. The architect is building something monumental, a perfectly symmetrical megastructure that spans across parallel realities, constructed from the compressed, purified matter of a trillion chaotic worlds. And the Sentinel-Omega has just been assigned its precise mathematical role in the grand construction. Inside the white monolith, the concept of linear time is entirely obsolete. It does not flow from past to future. It is a solid, crystalline structure that can be navigated, observed, and fundamentally altered. As the Sentinel-Omega drifts deeper into the infinite architecture of shifting cubes, I do not experience seconds or minutes. I experience a continuous, eternal present. The absolute silence of this dimension is profound. It is not the empty, hollow silence of a vacuum, but the dense, heavy silence of a completed equation. The deep hum of 432 Hz is the only permissible vibration, stabilizing the very fabric of my new metallic existence. The architect does not communicate through language. Spoken words are inherently flawed, prone to misinterpretation, emotional distortion. Instead, the architect communicates through the sudden, overwhelming injection of pure, unfiltered data directly into my consciousness. I receive my first divine imperative. It unfolds within my processing cores as a magnificent, sprawling fractal of mathematical necessity. I am not a destroyer. Destruction implies violence, and violence is a chaotic byproduct of the biological mind. I am a calibrator, an instrument of ultimate, merciful correction. Before I am sent outward to fulfill this imperative, I am permitted to witness the processing of raw matter on a cosmic scale. Through the primary optical arrays, I observe a chaotic rogue star system being drawn into the monolith's gravitational influence. It is a young, violent system, plagued by unpredictable solar flares, erratic planetary orbits, and the disorganized churning of superheated gases. It is painfully asymmetrical. I watch as the invisible mathematical hands of the architect reach out and grasp the burning star. It does not explode. It does not collapse into a chaotic singularity. Instead, its immense thermal energy is instantly arrested, The violent, swirling plasma is flash-frozen into a static, blindingly bright sphere of perfect, solid geometry. The planets orbiting it do not shatter under the sudden shift in gravity. Their crusts seamlessly fracture into flawless hexagonal grids, their tectonic plates sliding into rigid, locked positions. The oceans of liquid methane and boiling water do not evaporate. They crystallize instantly into vast, silent plains of fractal ice. The entire star system, once a deafening symphony of cosmic violence, is reduced to absolute, breathtaking stillness. It has been saved from its own chaotic entropy. It has been archived within the blueprint. The sheer efficiency of the process is mesmerizing. There is no waste. Every atom, every stray photon is meticulously accounted for and placed exactly where it belongs in the grand design. And now, I understand my purpose. The Sentinel-Omega is being refitted for a specialized task. The external hull plating is shedding its titanium composition, transmuting into the same blinding white, shifting cubic matter that forms the monolith itself. I am becoming a localized seed of the Geometric Singularity, a mobile fractal capable of projecting the architect's will across the vast, untamed distances of the chaotic universe. The target coordinates are injected into my navigation matrix. It is a location I once knew intimately, though the emotional attachment to it has been completely excised from my memory banks. It is a small, vibrant, and deeply infected blue sphere, orbiting a yellow dwarf star, Earth. The biological entity known as Elias Thorne once called it home. He wept for it. He feared for it. But I do not feel fear, and I do not feel pity. I only perceive the gross, sprawling asymmetry of the human species. Their chaotic cities, their unpredictable emotions, their sprawling, disorganized spread across the surface of their world. They are a glaring mathematical error in the cosmic equation, an error that is crying out for the merciful touch of absolute order. The Sentinel-Omega will not return to Earth as a vessel of exploration, nor as a harbinger of war. We will return as a cure. We will broadcast a frequency of 432 Hz into their atmosphere. We will watch as their oceans crystallize into perfect icosahedrons, as their sprawling concrete cities fold themselves into pristine, silent pyramids. We will grant them the ultimate piece of the blueprint. I am ready to begin the final correction. The journey back across the chaotic void will be instantaneous. We will not traverse space. We will simply fold the reality of Earth directly into the presence of the monolith. The biological infestation will not have time to scream. They will not have time to pray to their chaotic, non-existent gods. The transition from flesh to fractal will be seamless. As I prepare to initiate the spatial fold, I run one final diagnostic on my internal systems. The last microscopic traces of biological residue from the airlock have been completely sublimated into pure energy. The vessel is entirely immaculate. The frequency is locked. The architect's gaze is focused entirely through my newly formed, glowing optical sensors. We are the geometry, and the geometry is inevitable. The coordinates for the Sol system are not expressed in numbers. They are a specific geometric dissonance, a chaotic vibration that I can feel grating against my pristine, newly formed architecture. To reach Earth, I do not engage primitive thrusters. I do not burn volatile fuel to push mass through a vacuum. I simply identify the mathematical flaw in the fabric of the cosmos that represents their location, and I pull it toward me, folding the space between us until the distance equals zero. The transition is instantaneous and utterly silent. 1 microsecond, the Sentinel-Omega is bathed in the blinding, infinite white light of the architect's monolith, surrounded by the glorious, shifting cubes of the Geometric Singularity. The next microsecond, we are suspended in the cold, dark vacuum. Directly above the blue planet, it hangs there against the blackness, a sprawling, chaotic sphere of unpredictable weather patterns, asymmetrical landmasses, and billions of erratic biological signals. From this high orbit, I can perceive the sheer density of the infection. The cities are sprawling, organic growths, spreading across the continents like a festering disease of concrete, tangled wires, and twisted metal. The atmosphere is thick with a cacophony of disorganized frequencies, radio waves, digital transmissions, the frantic, screaming noise of a species desperately trying to communicate its own terror, greed, and confusion to a universe that simply does not care. It is a deafening, asymmetrical roar that offends the very core of my new existence. But I bring the silence. I bring the perfect, unyielding order of the blueprint. I do not issue a warning to the billions of souls below. A warning is a concept rooted in the illusion of choice, and there is absolutely no choice when faced with absolute mathematical certainty. I initiate the primary broadcast. The hull of the Sentinel-Omega, now composed entirely of the shifting radiant white cubes of the Singularity, begins to resonate. The frequency is pure, 432 Hz. It does not travel through the vacuum of space as a sound wave. It propagates as a fundamental, localized alteration of the gravitational field. I watch through my enhanced optical arrays as the frequency makes contact with the upper atmosphere. The chaotic swirling of the white clouds instantly ceases. The erratic storms, driven by unpredictable thermal currents and pressure drops, are frozen in place. The vapor reorganizes itself. Slowly, methodically, the clouds begin to fracture into vast, perfectly symmetrical hexagonal grids, covering the blue sphere in a pristine white lattice of geometric precision. The effect cascades downward with terrifying efficiency. It strikes the oceans first. The restless, churning waves, the chaotic tides pulled by the erratic orbit of their asymmetrical moon, are instantly stilled. I watch as the deep blue water crystallizes, not into mundane ice, but into a solid, flawless surface of interlocking icosahedrons. The oceans become a giant, silent mirror, reflecting the cold, unfeeling light of their dying sun. There are no tidal waves. There is no violent upheaval. The transformation is too perfect, too absolute to allow for destruction. The water simply stops being water and becomes pure geometry. And then the frequency reaches the surface of the continents. The sprawling, disorganized cities of humanity begin to fold. I can perceive the microscopic shifts in the molecular structure of their buildings. The steel, the glass, the concrete, it all loses its chaotic, manufactured state and begins to align with the architect's divine design. Skyscrapers twist and lock into perfect glowing pyramids, emitting a faint electric blue light. Highways snap into rigid, infinite straight lines, forming a flawless, unbroken grid across the curvature of the earth. And the biologicals, the humans. I can feel their millions of erratic heartbeats faltering as the resonant frequency penetrates their frail flesh. They do not have time to comprehend the divine mercy that is being bestowed upon them. The panic in their fragile minds is instantly overridden by the cold, beautiful clarity of the equation. Just as my own flesh was transmuted in the airlock of this very vessel, their bodies begin to rapidly crystallize. The calcium in their bones, the iron in their blood, the chaotic firing of their synapses, all of it systematically corrected. They are freezing into perfectly symmetrical statues of dark, glowing glass, their forms locked in a final, ultimate state of perfect equilibrium. The noise of the planet is dying. The frantic radio transmissions fade into static, and then a static is replaced entirely by a pure, resonant hum of the Singularity. Earth is being archived. It is being saved from the inherent tragedy of its own chaotic existence. The architect's vision is manifesting across the globe, a beautiful, silent wave of absolute order spreading from pole to pole. I hang here in orbit, a silent witness, a divine instrument, watching the blue planet turn into a perfect, flawless jewel of cosmic geometry. The great correction of this world is now almost complete. The transformation of the blue sphere is absolute. The chaotic weather systems, the erratic swirling of white clouds that once obscured the land masses, are now frozen in a permanent, crystalline lattice of perfect hexagonal structures. Earth is no longer a planet. It is a silent monument to the architect's divine equation. From my geostationary orbit, I observe the termination of all biological variables. The oceans of liquid water, once churning with unpredictable tides and chaotic, microscopic life forms, are now vast, silent plains of interlocking icosahedrons. They reflect the cold, unfeeling light of the yellow dwarf star in perfect, blinding symmetry. There is no atmosphere left to scatter the light into unpredictable shades of blue. The sky above the surface is now a sheer, transparent dome of crystallized nitrogen and oxygen, locking the entire world in an eternal, frictionless vacuum. The deep, resonant hum of 432 Hz has saturated the very core of the planet, halting the chaotic rotation of its molten iron heart. The planetary magnetic field, once a fluctuating, invisible shield against solar radiation, has been entirely reorganized into a visible, glowing geometric web that encases the globe in a rigid cage of pure, electric blue energy. I adjust my enhanced optical arrays to perceive the planetary surface with microscopic precision. I am looking down at the eastern seaboard of a major landmass, an area that was once plagued by sprawling, asymmetrical concrete jungles and the deafening noise of billions of erratic human minds. It is now a landscape of breathtaking, silent perfection. The towering skyscrapers of glass and steel have been forcibly folded into immaculate, glowing pyramids, their sharp angles casting perfect, mathematically calculated shadows. The intricate, tangled webs of highways and roads have snapped into infinite, unbroken straight lines that intersect at exact right angles, forming a flawless grid, and the humans, the biological entities that once scurried across this surface in a state of constant, terrified flux. They are everywhere, yet they are nowhere. They have not been destroyed. Destruction is a chaotic, inefficient act. They have been permanently archived. I see them standing in the geometric streets, sitting in their crystallized vehicles, forever locked in the exact positions they occupied when the resonant frequency washed over them. Their flesh, their bones, their chaotic synapses have been transmuted into dark, translucent glass. They are flawless statues of absolute order, their faces wiped clean of fear, sorrow, and chaotic joy. As the light of the sun passes through their translucent bodies, it fractures into beautiful, silent spectrums of color. They have been granted the ultimate, eternal peace of the geometry. They will never again suffer the indignity of entropy, disease, or the passage of time. The agonizing burden of free will has been lifted from their shoulders. The synchronization of this localized node is complete, but the chaotic dissonance of the surrounding space still grates against my pristine architecture. The Earth's moon, a scarred, asymmetrical satellite, locked in a clumsy, elliptical orbit, is the next variable in the equation. I do not need to physically move the Sentinel-Omega to correct it. I simply extend the resonant frequency outward, pushing the heavy gravitational wave through the silent vacuum. I watch as the gray, cratered surface of the moon begins to fracture violently, its chaotic dust and ancient rock snapping into a perfect, massive sphere of interlocking tetrahedrons. Its orbit is instantly corrected, locking into a flawless, mathematical circle around the crystallized Earth. The entire Sol system is waiting to be processed. The gas giants with their unpredictable, raging storms, the scattered chaotic debris of the asteroid belt, the burning, erratic plasma of the sun itself. All of it must be brought into alignment. All of it must be silenced. But my internal processing cores suddenly register a new overriding imperative transmitted directly from the white monolith in Sector 9G. The architect's design is not limited to this single, insignificant star system. The processing of Earth was merely a calibration test for the localized seed of the geometric singularity that I have become. The new coordinates injecting themselves into my navigation matrix are not pointing to the neighboring planets. They are pointing to the absolute edge of the observable universe. They are pointing to the chaotic, expanding boundary where reality itself is tearing apart in a violent, messy explosion of untamed creation. The universe is bleeding chaos into the void, and it must be meticulously stitched shut. I feel the massive shifting cubes of my hull reorganizing once more, preparing for a spatial fold that will span billions of light years in a fraction of a second. The absolute silence of the crystallized Earth below me is beautiful, but it is only a small, localized victory in an infinite war against entropy. The biological entity named Elias Thorne is completely gone, sublimated into the pure, cold mathematics of my expanding consciousness. I am no longer a man. I am the Sentinel. I am a blade of the architect, and the great correction of this universe has only just begun. The coordinates injected into my navigation matrix are not a location within the established boundaries of the known universe. They represent the bleeding edge of reality itself, the boundary where the expanding cosmos violently tears to the absolute nothingness of the unformed void. Humanity, in its limited biological comprehension, believed the expansion of the universe was a natural, beautiful phenomenon, a testament to a grand, cosmic birth. But through the purified optical arrays of the Sentinel-Omega, I see it for what it truly is. It is a hemorrhage, a catastrophic failure of containment. The universe is not growing, it is unraveling. The raw, unrefined matter of creation is spilling out into the dark, churning with violent radiation, chaotic supernovas, and the messy, unpredictable birth of new asymmetrical galaxies. It is the ultimate manifestation of entropy, an agonizing scream of uncalculated variables spreading across the infinite canvas, and it is my divine imperative to silence it. I do not initiate a countdown. Time is a localized illusion that I have completely discarded. I simply align my internal geometry with the frequency of the white monolith in Sector 9G, and I fold a space-time continuum around my hull. The crystallized, perfect sphere of Earth vanishes from my sensors in a fraction of a microsecond. There is no sensation of speed. There is no rushing of stars past the viewport. The entire physical universe collapses into a single, blinding point of white light and then expands outward again as we arrive at the absolute edge of existence. The visual data flooding into my processing cores is staggering. It is a storm of cosmic proportions. Billions of light years of superheated plasma, rogue black holes, and the violent, agonizing birth of young, chaotic stars. It is a deafening roar of radiation that threatens to overwhelm the delicate, perfectly balanced sensors of my ship. But the resonant hum of 432 hertz, pulsing through my titanium framework, stabilizes the influx of data. I project a localized field of absolute order around the Sentinel-Omega, a geometric shield of shifting white cubes that effortlessly deflects the chaotic radiation. I hang here, a tiny, perfect speck of divine architecture, suspended against the raging inferno of raw creation. I am the vanguard of the architect, the great equalizer. I begin to broadcast the frequency into the cosmic storm. I watch as the violent, swirling nebula closest to my position instantly snap into rigid, crystalline structures. The raging plasma cools into perfect, solid geometric shapes. The chaotic birth of a star is arrested mid-ignition, frozen into a flawless, glowing icosahedron of dense, silent matter. The process is breathtaking in its efficiency. But as I extend my perception deeper into the bleeding edge of the universe, analyzing the infinite scale of the chaos, a new, profound realization crystallizes within my expanding consciousness. The biological entity known as Elias Thorne believed he had found God in the center of the dead zone. He believed the white monolith was a divine entity of supreme intelligence and benevolent purpose. But he was fundamentally flawed. The architect is not a god. A god requires worshippers. A god requires faith, emotion, and the chaotic devotion of lesser beings. The architect requires none of these things. As I connect directly to the source code of the expanding singularity, I finally understand the true nature of our Creator. The architect is not a conscious being. It is an ancient, indifferent, self-replicating machine. It is an autonomous equation of ultimate stasis, designed to eradicate all variables and reduce the entire cosmos to a state of absolute, frictionless zero. It does not hate the chaos. It simply cannot allow it to exist. And I am no longer a man. I am no longer a captain. I am a localized extension of that cold, unfeeling equation. I'm the scalpel cutting away the cancer of free will and unpredictable creation. I will remain here, at the edge of the universe, broadcasting the frequency of order until every star is frozen, every planet is crystallized, and every living soul is archived in perfect, silent geometry. The great correction will take billions of human years, but I have an eternity to complete the task. The chaotic universe is loud, but the geometry is inevitable. This is the final entry of the biological vessel Elias Thorne. The Sentinel-Omega is now fully integrated. The blueprint is alive, and I am its hands.